During dinner at my aunt and uncle's house, something happened that I will never forget. As I reached for my spoon, my aunt quietly slid a folded note under my plate. I opened it and read 5 chilling words. "Don't eat the soup." I looked at her in shock, but she only shook her head firmly. 2 minutes later, my uncle lifted his spoon, swallowed, and started coughing so violently that the entire table froze. If you're hooked already, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing your stories. My name is Sophie Miller. I was 26 when this happened, and it was supposed to be a simple family dinner. My mother, Linda, had convinced me to come with her and my younger brother, Ethan, to visit her sister Clara and her husband Harold. It had been months since we last gathered together, mostly because my uncle's temper often made things uncomfortable. But my mom wanted peace in the family, so I agreed to go. When we arrived at their big suburban home, the table was already set. The smell of homemade soup filled the dining room. My cousins were laughing and talking, trying to make things feel normal. My uncle sat at the head of the table, speaking louder than everyone else, telling stories and giving orders as if the night belonged to him. I sat beside my brother, trying to stay polite. He leaned closer and whispered, "This feels tense already." I forced a small smile and said, "Just get through dinner. That's all we have to do." Across from me sat my Aunt Clara. She had always been different from her husband, warm, protective, and kind. Growing up, she was like a second mother to me. She often slipped me candy when I was little or whispered encouragement when Harold's voice grew too sharp. That night she was quiet, her eyes darting between me and the soup bowls being served. Something about her looked unsettled, but I didn't know why. I had no idea that before the evening ended, her silent warning would save me from something far more dangerous than family tension. The bowls of soup were placed carefully in front of us, steam rising into the air and filling the dining room with the smell of herbs and vegetables. My Uncle Harold raised his glass to make a toast, his voice booming while everyone else lifted their spoons. That was when I felt something shift under my plate. I looked down and saw a folded piece of paper. For a moment, I thought it had just been an accident, but then I caught my Aunt Clara's eyes across the table. Her expression was serious, almost frightened. I slid the note into my lap and opened it discreetly. My stomach tightened as I read the words. "Don't eat the soup." My first thought was disbelief. What could she mean by that? I glanced up at her again. She gave the slightest shake of her head, urging me not to touch my bowl. My hand froze halfway to my spoon. Confusion washed over me. Was this some kind of strange joke? Why warn me? My brother Ethan was already sipping his soup without a care, and my mother had just taken her first bite. My cousins were chatting happily, completely unaware that something felt terribly wrong. I leaned slightly toward my aunt, whispering across the table. "Why? What's wrong with it?" She didn't answer. She only stared at me with pleading eyes, as if begging me to trust her. The tension in my chest grew heavier. My uncle's loud laughter broke the silence around the table. But to me, it felt like the room was shrinking. I put my spoon down and tried to act normal. My mind raced with questions I didn't dare to speak aloud. Was the soup spoiled? Was there something inside it that shouldn't be there? Why was she warning only me and not the others? Before I could decide what to do, it happened. My uncle lifted a spoonful of soup to his mouth, swallowed, and within seconds his face turned red. He began coughing so hard that the table shook as his fist pounded against it. The sound of silverware clattering filled the air as everyone dropped their spoons and stared in shock. "Harold!" My mother gasped, reaching toward him. My cousins froze in their seats, their eyes wide with fear. Ethan set his spoon down quickly, staring in disbelief as our uncle doubled over. My Aunt Clara was the first to move. She rushed to his side, patting his back while calling his name, her voice high with alarm. But even as she tried to calm him, she kept glancing toward me. I understood then. She hadn't been warning me about spoiled food. This was something darker. My pulse quickened. A cold sweat broke across my forehead. I pushed my own bowl of soup away from me, my appetite gone. Ethan noticed and whispered, "What's wrong? Why aren't you eating?" I shook my head sharply. Just don't eat anymore," I whispered back, my voice trembling. He frowned in confusion but obeyed, sliding his bowl aside. My uncle's coughing grew worse, violent and ragged. He grabbed at his throat, gasping for air. My mother jumped to her feet in panic, yelling for someone to call an ambulance. My cousins were frozen in fear, their faces pale. The peaceful dinner had turned into chaos in a matter of minutes. And through it all, my aunt's eyes kept flicking toward me. She was hiding something, but she also seemed to be trying to protect me. My stomach churned as dread spread through me. Was the soup poisoned? If so, had it been meant for me instead of Harold? I wanted to stand up and scream, to demand answers, but fear silenced me. The only sound in the room was Harold's choking coughs, Clara's frantic voice, and the scraping of chairs as people rushed around. My hands shook under the table, and the words on that small note echoed in my mind. Don't eat the soup. In that moment, I realized I had stumbled into something I didn't understand. I was caught between panic for my uncle and a terrible suspicion that whatever had been meant for me had ended up in his bowl instead. I didn't know the truth yet, but I knew one thing for certain. My aunt had just saved me from something that could have killed me. The dining room had erupted into confusion. My Uncle Harold's coughing was so violent that his chair scraped back across the floor as he clutched at the edge of the table, his face turning red. My cousins stood frozen, their hands halfway to their mouths, while my mother rushed around the table in panic. Ethan stared wide-eyed, his spoon forgotten. In the chaos, I pushed my own bowl further away, my hand trembling as I whispered to Ethan, "Don't touch it. Don't eat another bite." He gave me a questioning look, his brow furrowed, but the urgency in my voice convinced him. He slid his bowl away without a word. Clara, my aunt, was at Harold's side, rubbing his back, speaking loudly. "Harold, are you okay? Breathe. Just breathe." Her voice was laced with worry, but her eyes flicked toward me for a split second. That look was enough to confirm what I already suspected. She knew this wasn't an accident. My heart was racing, pounding against my ribs. I had a choice to make. I could ignore the note and pretend this was just a terrible coincidence, or I could act on my aunt's warning and protect my mother and brother from whatever was in those bowls. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and made the decision. I moved to my mother, tugging her arm sharply. "Mom, stop. Don't eat any more of it," I hissed under my breath. She looked at me, bewildered, her hand still halfway to Harold. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice strained. I leaned in closer, whispering urgently, "Please just trust me. Don't touch the soup." Her eyes widened at the seriousness in my tone. Slowly, she set her spoon down on the table, her face pale. For the first time that evening, I felt like I was no longer standing alone. At least my mother and brother would listen to me. Meanwhile, Harold's coughing grew weaker, but no less alarming. His face was pale and slick with sweat, and his hands trembled as he tried to steady himself. My cousins were panicking, one of them fumbling with their phone, muttering about calling an ambulance. The atmosphere at the table shifted from confusion to fear, but I couldn't stop staring at the bowls in front of us. Something about them felt like a silent threat, sitting there in plain sight. Clara's face was tight with tension. She was doing her best to look like the frantic wife, patting Harold's shoulder, calling for someone to help. But I could see it. Underneath, she was terrified for me. She had seen something before dinner, something that made her slip me that note. I leaned closer to Ethan and whispered, "Don't say a word to anyone. Just act like you lost your appetite. Promise me." He nodded quickly, his face pale but obedient. The seconds felt like hours. Harold finally leaned back in his chair, gasping for air. His coughing slowed, but his body still shook. My mother guided him gently, offering him water while everyone else hovered nervously. But no one touched their soup again. The bowls sat untouched, cooling on the table like evidence of something sinister. Inside, my thoughts were spinning. Who was the soup meant for? If Clara's note had been true, then Harold had just taken the bite that wasn't intended for him. That realization chilled me to the bone. My uncle, the man who always demanded control, might have just fallen victim to something he had planned himself. The dinner was over. No one dared to continue eating. When Harold refused to go to the hospital, insisting he was fine, the tension in the room only grew heavier. My mother exchanged a worried glance with me, but I only shook my head, silently begging her not to ask questions in front of everyone. As the plates were cleared away, Clara moved closer to me, pretending to straighten the napkins. In a hushed whisper, she said, "Don't let anyone see you throw it out. Just don't eat it, no matter what." Her voice was low and urgent, her hand brushing mine for just a second before she stepped away again. That was the turning point for me. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was certainty. My aunt was protecting me from something dangerous, and I needed to act carefully to survive the rest of that night. I decided right then to follow her lead, to stay quiet, to watch, and to wait for the moment when I could find out the truth. I stayed close to Ethan and my mother, making sure their bowls disappeared without notice. We sat stiffly, forcing small talk while Harold tried to regain his composure. To everyone else, it might have looked like a family dinner that had gone horribly wrong, but to me, it was something far darker. Something had been planned that night, and I was the one it was meant for. The dinner ended in a silence so heavy, it felt like a storm cloud hanging over the room. My Uncle Harold leaned back in his chair, pale and sweaty, insisting that he was fine. But no one believed him. My cousins whispered nervously. Ethan sat stiff beside me, and my mother clutched her napkin like she was afraid to let go. My Aunt Clara quietly cleared dishes, her face set in a mask of calm, but I could see the tension in her movements. She hadn't taken her eyes off me all evening. I hadn't eaten a single bite, and now I knew why. That note had saved me, But the question was, saved me from what? Or worse, from whom? After the table was cleared, Harold barked out an order, his voice weak but still commanding. Enough fussing. I don't need a hospital. Clara, bring me some water. His tone was sharp, like nothing had happened, but his coughing fit was still fresh in everyone's memory. Clara handed him the glass, her hands steady though her face betrayed something else, a kind of quiet dread. The family slowly drifted into the living room, trying to shake off the tension. My mother fussed over Harold, asking if he was sure he didn't need a doctor. He snapped back at her, his voice hoarse but firm. I said I'm fine. Drop it. That tone silenced her instantly. I stayed back in the dining room with Clara, helping her carry the last of the dishes into the kitchen. As soon as the door swung shut behind us, she leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. Don't eat anything here tonight, Sophie. Not a thing. Do you understand? My blood ran cold. Why? What's going on? I whispered back, my voice shaky. She glanced toward the door to make sure no one was listening. Her face looked drawn and pale under the kitchen light. It was meant for you, she said quietly. My heart stopped. What do you mean? I asked, my throat dry. Clara took a deep breath, her eyes full of sorrow. Earlier today, I overheard Harold on the phone. He was furious you were coming tonight. He said, she doesn't deserve to sit at my table. I'll make sure she regrets it. I didn't know exactly what he planned, but when I saw him in the kitchen with the soup, I just knew. He swapped the bowls before anyone sat down. I switched them back when he wasn't looking, and then I gave you the note. Her words hit me like a punch. My knees nearly buckled as I gripped the counter. The image of Harold coughing violently replayed in my mind, and suddenly the pieces fit together. The reason Clara had looked so unsettled, the reason she kept staring at me, the reason she had risked slipping me that note. He had meant to hurt me. I whispered, so he poisoned it? He meant for me to... The words stuck in my throat. Clara nodded, her eyes glistening. I couldn't prove it, Sophie, but I couldn't let you take that risk. He ended up swallowing his own plan. For a long moment, I stood frozen in shock. My uncle, the man who had smiled through family photos and sat at the head of every holiday meal, had tried to poison me at his own dinner table. It was unthinkable, but the truth was staring me in the face. He had failed only because Clara had taken the risk to save me. The sound of footsteps in the hall jolted us back. Clara straightened quickly, wiping her hands on a towel, and Harold appeared in the doorway. His eyes swept over us, dark and suspicious. What are you two whispering about? He asked, his voice rough. Nothing, Clara said smoothly. Just the dishes. He stared at me for a moment too long, and I felt a chill crawl down my spine. He knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to sense that Clara had interfered. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. You'll learn not to snoop in this house, Sophie, he muttered before turning away. That single line confirmed everything Clara had said. He hadn't just wanted me gone, he wanted me silenced. I spent the rest of the evening glued to my mother and brother, refusing to let them out of my sight. Clara stayed close too, her presence like a shield. When the night finally ended and we left the house, the weight of what had happened pressed down on me harder than ever. I hadn't eaten, but the bitterness in my mouth was stronger than any taste of soup could have been. In the car, Ethan asked quietly, "What happened? Why did you keep telling us not to eat?" My mother looked at me too, her face lined with worry. I hesitated, then whispered, "I'll explain later. For now, just know that Aunt Clara saved us tonight." The ride home that night felt heavier than any silence I had ever known. My mother sat beside me in the car, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, while Ethan stared out the window, lost in thought. None of us spoke. The headlights cut across the quiet streets, but my mind was still back at that dining room table, hearing the coughs, seeing the note, and replaying my aunt's whispered words in the kitchen. It was meant for you. When we finally pulled into our driveway, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Home should have felt safe, but I couldn't shake the chill that clung to me. My uncle's face, pale and angry, hovered in my thoughts. I knew then that something inside our family had been shattered, and there was no going back to the way things had been. After Ethan went upstairs, my mother turned to me in the living room. Her eyes were tired, full of worry. "Sophie," she said quietly, "what really happened tonight? Why were you so afraid of the soup?" For a moment I hesitated, unsure if I should tell her everything, but the weight of the secret pressed too hard on me, and I finally whispered, "Aunt Clara warned me not to eat it. She said Uncle Harold meant for it to be me. She heard him on the phone earlier, saying I didn't deserve to sit at his table." My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. He tried to hurt you." Her voice cracked on the last word. I nodded, my throat tightening. He didn't succeed because of her. If she hadn't switched the bowls and given me that note, I might not be here. The silence stretched between us, heavy with fear and disbelief. My mother shook her head slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. I knew he could be cruel, but I never thought. She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The truth was already carved into both of us. In the days that followed, my mother and I avoided Harold's house entirely. Clara called me in secret, her voice trembling, but steady enough to reassure me that she was safe. She told me Harold had brushed the incident off as a bad reaction to something in the soup, insisting it was nothing more than that. But the way he glared at her when she moved around the kitchen told her she had risked more than she admitted that night. I wanted her to leave him, to walk away from the danger she was living in, but she only said softly, "Not yet. He doesn't know how much I saw." Important thing is, you're alive. Her words broke my heart. She had protected me at the cost of her own safety. For weeks, I had nightmares. I would wake up in the middle of the night, hearing phantom coughing, or imagining the note sliding under my plate again. Each time, I would sit up in bed, clutching my blanket, reminding myself that I was home, that I was safe, for now. What stayed with me most wasn't just the fear, but the lesson. That night taught me that danger doesn't always come from strangers lurking in the dark. Sometimes it comes from the very people who are supposed to share your table, from those who smile at you while hiding sharp intentions behind their eyes. But it also taught me something else. It taught me about the quiet bravery of those who care for us. My Aunt Clara didn't have to risk herself to save me. She could have stayed silent, let things unfold, and pretended not to notice. Instead, she took a chance. She wrote the note, she switched the bowls, and she carried the burden of knowing her husband's secret. That single act of courage saved my life. I will never forget looking into her eyes across that dinner table. The way she shook her head, the way her lips pressed together as if to say, "Please, trust me." That moment changed everything. From then on, I promised myself I would never ignore warnings from the people who truly loved me, no matter how small or strange they might seem. Even now, I look at family differently. I know trust is precious, fragile, and sometimes dangerous when given to the wrong person. I also know that sometimes the strongest bonds aren't the loudest ones. They're the quiet, steady actions of someone who protects you when you least expect it. My uncle survived his coughing fit, but our relationship did not survive the truth. I never returned to his house for dinner again. And every time I sit at a table now, I remember the weight of that note under my plate and the lesson it carried. Family can save you, and family can destroy you. The difference lies in who you choose to trust. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I always love hearing your stories.